Going back a little bit, so Rabbi Weinberg studied in the famous Slobodka Yeshiva. Did he always consider himself a student, a mussar student of Slobodka? Was that ingrained in him for his entire life?
He never turned his back on it. When he was heading institutions in Germany, did he impose most of the regimens there? I have no evidence of it, but he never turned his back on it. Various stages in his life, he wrote about Slobodka mussar, wrote about mussar in general. He was one of the first people who wrote seriously about mussar and wrote about it from within. Again, and there's no point, I don't think that he really imposed it. He didn't crusade in favor of turning Hildesheimers into a mussar yeshiva.
If you can perhaps tell our listeners a little bit about the Hildesheimer Seminary, what it was all about, where German Jewry stood at the time when Rabbi Weinberg came to Germany and headed the Hildesheimer Seminary.
Azriel Hildesheimer founded the seminary probably in the 1870s. He had been a Rav in Hungary, and there he was somewhat isolated. Hungarian Jewry either went in the reform direction, what they called neo-Orthodox, or they were anti-general studies and against any kind of interaction with other kinds of Jews. Hildesheimer's position was probably about 10% of the Hungarian world, and at a certain point, it was better off for him to be in Germany. The seminary was a place where students were ordained. They became the bulk of the German rabbinate, German Orthodox rabbinate. It was also a place where they studied other things, including what today's called academic Jewish studies, Bible, Jewish history, to some degree, the use of modern philological method in the study of Talmud. Hildesheimer herself had a PhD and was interested in these areas. The Hildesheimer student was also required to have a university education, which they got elsewhere, University of Berlin or wherever else they got the degree. So these were people who represented a certain kind of ideal. Hildesheimer led the seminary for many years. He died, he was succeeded by Dr. Tzvi Hoffman, who was an important posek for German Jewry, and today is probably best known as an academic Talmud scholar, and as a very important person in biblical studies. Hoffman died probably around 1922, was succeeded by Leo Kaplan, young man with an Eastern European training, like Yechiel Weinberg, and unfortunately he died very young. So you had that kind of framework. You had an institution that was not the traditional kind of yeshiva, but was very seriously Orthodox. And as you got into the 1920s, the curriculum became closer to that of the Eastern European world, where you had teachers whose training had been in Lithuania. Generally, this was developed in German Jewry. As time went on, they became closer to the Eastern European Jew. For some of the leading German Orthodox thinkers, World War I had a lot to do with it. Those who were in the army, Isaac Breuer was Shimshon von Hirsch's grandson, was in Eastern Europe during the war, and that brought a lot over. The Hirschian community in Frankfurt, Roy Hirsch had planned a yeshiva. It never happened until after World War I. There was an appetite for it, and the time was right. The Hildesheimer approach was in many respects different from the Hirschine approach because they did value academic study, not simply university education, reading literature and studying the best as in thought by European man, but they also were interested in Semitic languages and textual history of Talmud, even biographical study of Talmudic rabbis and the like. So there wasn't such a gap, and that gap continued, I think, during the 1920s as well.